Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. If folks can turn their cameras on, it would be wonderful to see you. If you cannot, we completely understand. My name is Andy Engel, and I lead virtual public programs here at Reimagine. For those who may not know, Reimagine is a nonprofit organization catalyzing a uniquely powerful community. People of different backgrounds, people of different races, different ages, different faiths, people of no faith, all coming together to find solace in a very, very troubled world. Lately, it's been extremely disorienting. It's been disheartening. And I hope we can all find some support together tonight as we all face adversity, loss, and mortality and transform life's biggest challenges into purpose, action, and growth. A little bit about the history of Reimagine's Vigils. We began as a response to a need that we saw, spaces to openly acknowledge and share our personal and collective grief. And this happened in shortly after the pandemic broke in March of 2020. At Reimagine, we create opportunities, mostly in the digital space, where people can talk freely about living and dying, about death and loss, about grief and sorrow, but also about joy. If you're able to share something in the chat, something this past week that has brought you just a little bit of joy, please share. We'd love to hear from you. I'm going to this is the slide I was supposed to present earlier, but I didn't, about Reimagine. A little bit about Zoom instructions. Before we begin, for those who wish, you can click on the CC icon to get a transcript of what's being said. And you can also see a full recording, a full transcript by clicking on the CC icon and selecting the View Full Transcript option, if that's helpful for you. And you can also save and download the chat, which I hope you'll use, by clicking on the three dots within the chat box. Feel free to send me or my colleagues, Nicole or Dara, a note in the chat if you're having any technical difficulty. We might be able to help you. I want to share some touchstones with you. What kind of space this is. This is a collective space to grieve. It's a space that cultivates compassion for others and for ourselves. Most of us have arrived here with some kind of pain in our hearts. And our hope is to help people of all backgrounds and abilities to face loss, mortality, and adversity, and to create a more compassionate world. Also, this is a space for bravery. It takes courage to show up for others, especially folks who you don't know. And it takes courage to lament and to grieve in public. There are few spaces to acknowledge this type of grief. And with all that's going on, people need to access gatherings where they can talk openly about this. So let's choose to respect, honor everyone in this space. What kind of space this isn't. It's not about blaming. It's not about imposing beliefs on others. It's not about providing solutions or fixing things. Another thing I want to emphasize is that although this is not a political space, it is a space to cultivate social justice. Our colleague Mazen Jamal has offered this definition of justice, quote, "It's an environment of integrity and wholeness, achieved through healing and transformation. When justice is present, we can trust that our safety and well-being are valued in a community or society. This is our aspiration for tonight. Okay, what's going to happen? The vigil is about 80 minutes in total. We're going to begin with the candle lighting ceremony. So if you don't have your candle or your matches, now is a good time to grab them. After lighting candles, we'll hear from our very special guests, Dr. Mary Frances O'Connor and Stephanie Sarazin. We'll hear more about them soon. And after that, Reverend Jessica Sharp will lead our honor ceremony, which is the second half of the program. And that's going to be your opportunity to enter names of loved ones and things that you're grieving tonight. And then we bookend the vigil with candle extinguishing, and we'll offer some announcements. And now is the time where I'd like to invite my colleagues, Nicole Tan, Derek Hosberg, and Amanda Nagai to lead us in the candle lighting ceremony. So I'm going to stop this. Oops, actually, no, I need to share because that's where the blessing is. Hold on one second, folks. Folks, I'm having a little difficulty. What I would ask of my colleagues, if you would kindly share in the chat the blessings, I would appreciate that. Thank you. And folks, you can read along in the chat when that's shared. Let's see. Thank you, Amanda. Okay. Nicole, you're kicking it off.
By lighting our candles, we mourn division, terrorism, murder, war, trauma, hatred, and all that is disconnected from love. We honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
By lighting our candles, we mourn division, terrorism, murder, war, trauma, hatred, and all that is disconnected from love. We honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
By lighting our candles, we mourn division, terrorism, murder, war, trauma, hatred, and all that is disconnected from love. We honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
Okay, everyone, let's light our candles. Okay. I'm going to go into gallery view. You might want to do that too if you haven't. Shine your light on someone. Let's take a moment together. Thank you. Brad Wolf has joined us, and I've asked him to take over for the second half of the program for the honor ceremony. So we'll get to hear from Brad soon. You may ask a question during the interview. And now it's my great honor to welcome two of our guests. Mary Frances O'Connor is an author and professor of psychology at the University of Arizona. At U of A, she directs the Glass Lab, which investigates the effects of grief on the brain and the body. Her previous book, The Grieving Brain, was included on Oprah's list of best books to comfort a grieving friend. Her newest book, The Grieving Body, was just published last month by HarperCollins. Her record of scholarship is outstanding. In addition to her books, she's authored numerous research papers in peer-reviewed scientific journals. And she's a beloved teacher and mentor to those in academia and those in the grief, caregiving, and end-of-life space. She grew up in Montana and now lives in Tucson. Welcome, Mary Frances.
Thank you, Andy. Good to be here.
Oh, it's good to have you. Stephanie Sarazin, my colleague. She's a writer, she's a researcher, she's an educator, and she's best known for her expertise in a grief that isn't associated with death loss. Her book, Soul Broken, A Guide for Your Journey Through Ambiguous Grief, was named the gold winner by the 2023 Nautilus Book Awards and has received praise from leading voices including Adam Grant, Elizabeth Lesser, and Maria Shriver. Steph is also a beloved Reimagine collaborator who participated in Pieces of Me, a 3-part series on identity loss last fall. Please welcome Mary Frances O'Connor and Stephanie Sarazin.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Andy, for such a warm introduction. And hello, Mary Frances. This is, thank you for this incredible, beautiful, and important work. I'm so glad to be in conversation with you this evening and to see so many others here with us tonight. Andy and your entire team, thanks so much for having us. The Candle Vigil is always such a beautiful, special experience. And as we begin, Mary Frances, I'd love to know who it is that you're here for in remembrance in Vigil.
So as you talk about stuff, not all grief is after death. And so I am here tonight for my closest friend, who I dedicated my first book to, who's been my closest friend since we were 14, who will undergo a stem cell transplant from leukemia at the end of the month. And I'm holding vigil for her in my heart every day these days. So I'm grateful to have this space with all of you to actually be able to acknowledge grief like this. And Steph, tell me, who are you here for tonight in this vigil?
Oh, thank you, Mary Frances, for sharing and for asking. I'm here always for my brother, Eric. Eric died almost 2 years ago now, but he lived for 46 years, and he lived severely multiply impaired. He never spoke a word, he never took a step, but he undoubtedly has been my life's greatest teacher. And also here for my parents, his caregivers, who grieve him deeply.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. And as we have this time together, I have to say there's so much that I've learned, Mary Frances, from the Grieving Brain, the beautiful predecessor to the Grieving Body. And while we have this time together tonight, I'm hoping to just touch on some things that were so helpful for me that I suspect might be helpful for the many here with us this evening who haven't yet been able to read the book, or maybe have, and they're excited to hear these topics from you too. But just to kind of frame the discussion, I was hoping we could talk a little bit about, just the basics. Why is our body impacted by grief when it's something that we often associate with our emotions and with our brain? Why is the intensity different depending on who we're grieving or when or why? It's so variable, right?
Yeah.
So, and you've got some science to tell us why that is. And you talk about symptoms in the book. And I think that it's obvious in retrospect, but it wasn't obvious until I read it in front of me through your words. So hopefully if we can touch on those topics and then leave with some tools, imparted from your wisdom, I'd be so happy, and I hope others will be as well. Does that sound okay?
That sounds like a great
Okay.
conversation.
Super. Well, So as Andy said, you're a scientist, you're a university professor, you're a researcher, yet this book doesn't read like an academic text. I read it like I was studying for an exam, but it doesn't read like that. It's not a lecture or, a dry research kind of, analysis. It's written with such warmth and compassion because you're not only studying grievers, you are a griever. You know loss and grief firsthand. And you talk about that, and you shared a little bit just now in the vigil with your friend, and I was wondering if you would be so kind as to read for us the part of the introduction where you share your experience, beginning on page 5 when you start talking about your mom.
Yeah. My mom's experience has profoundly affected me. So perhaps I said it best as I wrote it. So I will read it as you suggest here. When my mother died in December 1999, our family had been anticipating.
Oh, Mary, you've muted yourself somehow or something happened. I don't know why.
I am so sorry. I don't know how that happened, but we'll start again on the reading part.
Great.
When my mother died in 1999, our family had been anticipating it for years. When I was 13 years old, she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, followed by a mastectomy and a year of weekly chemotherapy, which led to days of her never changing out of her bathrobe. She then spent many years in remission, followed by a metastatic recurrence, and then a shorter time to the next metastasis, and so on. But all of this medical management was nothing compared to the painful management of our relationship as I entered high school and then moved over 1,000 miles away to college. I explored the world, motivated by that outward focused stage of my life, trying to create a little space between us while feeling her emotional dependence on me and her heartbreaking grief in my absence. Navigating this change in my closeness with her, navigating my enduring love for her while I developed greater closeness with romantic attachments and friends, felt impossible. When she died, I was relieved to no longer be torn between seeking my way in the world and returning repeatedly to Montana, where I grew up. The expectation that I be present at her bedside or wrestle with the guilt when I was not finally ceased. But of course, our loved ones do not only live in the outer physical world. They also live on in the virtual world of our mind, encoded in the neural connections of our brain, and my internal relationship with my mother continued as well. Her approval still mattered to me, even though she was no longer there in person. Even after our Sunday phone calls ended, I stressed about not meeting expectations she would have had. When others I cared for experienced depression or anxiety, I continued to see it as my job to fix it, just as I had tried to do for her. Our relationship continued to shape me long after her death, and my anxiety and strong emotional reactivity, which I attributed to my interactions with her, persisted during my bereavement. From the outside, my friends saw me ricochet through my days, always busy, always energetic. But I was detached from my body, not spending much time aware of my physical state. This prolonged state of agitation likely reflected high levels of stress hormones, which take a toll on the immune system.
Thank you. Thank you. And you go on to say, I mean, so much of that resonates, first of all. The emotional reactivity, the conflicting emotions, ping-ponging between guilt and so much love and anxiety and stress, and all of that is deeply resonates. And as you say, in the following chapters, it was in the year or so after your mother's death, you began to notice a twinkle in your limbs, and that was later diagnosed via MRI as
Yeah.
multiple sclerosis. And
Yeah.
you say that while you're very clear that you're not saying that your mother's death caused your multiple sclerosis, you have a hereditary predisposition. The symptoms were certainly something within your body and perhaps activated those
Timing. Yeah.
the symptoms, right? And I just want to say, you know, again, as somebody who came into grief work through non-death loss, when you say how the loss, grief over the loss of health is certainly different than grief onset by physical death, but the feeling of not knowing how to operate in the world makes them both resound as grief. And thank you for that validation. For so many of us who go through the world and can look back and say, oh, that was grief. You know, once we understand, it kind of takes more shape. And so regarding these symptoms, tell us what you found. You know, as you were talking about all the different ways that grief manifests in our body, I thought you drew a brilliant comparison to pregnancy.
Yes.
Could you talk about that and kind of how you frame these takeaways, grief and pregnancy?
Right. We don't, that's not the most obvious analogy.
No, it's not.
Let me try and make a little bit of sense of that. What we know is that the death of a loved one is one of the greatest human stressors that we face. And that is something that we see resound in the body of adults, in the body of children, in the body even of animals that have pair bonds. We see that there's a physiological reaction when there's separation and loss. And what that means is that, to be, you know, really clear, grief is not a disease any more than pregnancy is a disease, right? And yet this time of bereavement is a time when there's physiological changes. Similarly, people would say pregnancy is fairly physiological.
Right.
But what it means is that we know from really careful research that there's increased risk for medical illness during bereavement. Just like in pregnancy, we have increased risk for gestational diabetes or hypertension, right? And so bereavement is a risky time because our body is trying to regulate, is trying to figure out how to live in this world, given that part of us has been amputated. And so it takes time for the body to figure out how to make all the systems work when our loved one isn't there to hug us when we get home, when our loved one isn't sort of behind us, cheering us on when we're in college, you know? And so the many symptoms that we experience are a lot around just trying to figure out how to regulate now that this terrible loss has happened. But in addition, we have to think about the fact that if that physical stress gets sort of beyond the bounds of what human bodies can do, that can lead us into things like heart attack or cancer or pneumonia or, right? And so what that means is, like with pregnancy, we know the risk is high. And so we have set up systems of care, prenatal care, so that we can educate people about what it means to be pregnant and what should happen and what really is a worrying sign. And then we have ways of intervening if people discover that their process isn't going quite right. And that capacity as a society to set up systems of care for bereaved people, to help educate them, increase the literacy around grief, and then offer them opportunities that if their system is not doing well, how to intervene is something I think that we need.
And so what are some symptoms that we might be looking for, or maybe we're looking backward to say, oh, that explains it? What are kind of the most prevalent symptoms you see?
So the sort of scientific fact that really started me down this 25-year research trajectory was, in fact, dying of a broken heart. That people think that's a metaphor, but actually that's in the epidemiological evidence. So we can say it this way. In the first 3 months after the death of a loved one, a man whose wife has died is almost twice as likely to die of a heart attack than a married man during that same time. And for women, it's slightly less, 1.8 times more likely than a married woman during that same time. And so it makes you think, well, how does that, right? Like the death of this person who's outside of us, how does that get under our skin? How does it get into our tissues? And I think when you think about it, you can't really think about grief and loss without thinking about love and bonding, right? And so what happens is when you fall in love with your baby or you fall in love with the person who becomes your spouse, you form this we, and that is deeply encoded. I will always be here for you. You will always be there for me. And then when that person is missing, our brain sets off alarm bells saying, wait, where are they? What's happening? Why are they not here? We should be together. And the way that those alarm bells are set off from the brain goes into our cardiovascular system, goes into our immune system, our endocrine or hormone system. And that has these medical repercussions then. Now, some of those symptoms, most people we know on average experience a little increase in heart rate in those first 6 months, a little increase in blood pressure. And for most of us, we have surprisingly resilient bodies. Our body is able to tolerate the waves of grief where our blood pressure goes up a little and then it comes back down again as that wave recedes. But what we need to be aware of is if we are seeing in our grieving friends or feeling in ourselves that there is something wrong, we should take that very seriously. The way we treat a heart attack that comes after the death of a loved one is the way we treat any heart attack. And so that person needs to be treated in an emergency department, just like we would for anyone else. We see this in, occasionally in really sort of famous examples where couples, one dies shortly after another.
Okay, so then if I'm hearing you, so grief is a medical risk factor for which medical care and intervention is important and could be helpful and valuable. And it is is the intensity a result of the attachment bond then? Is that where you're saying that attachment, that we, that us, which is now suddenly, okay. And so then how might that makes perfect sense and is and one of those ahas that hadn't occurred to me. Even though I'd explored it a bit in my own work. And something I'm really curious about as you were saying that is, what are your thoughts then on how we might detach healthfully? How do we become more adept at navigating this new world where, I don't know why George Bailey from It's a Wonderful Life keeps coming to mind all of a sudden, where the banister knob like keeps coming off, and then one day it's not there anymore, and it's such a part of your muscle memory, right?
Yes.
Okay. And
exactly.
so then what?
I should be really clear. Obviously, the broken heart is not the only physical symptom that people experience. What's actually kind of amazing is that every organ system of the body seems to be impacted. And we think, if you think about it, if it's our immune system and our hormones that are really ramped up during the stress of loss, then those affect every single organ, right? So inflammation, that some of my research when I was at UCLA demonstrated is higher during bereavement. Inflammation, if you have asthma, inflammation makes it harder to breathe. If you have rheumatoid arthritis, inflammation makes your joints hurt more, right? It doesn't need to be all in the same organ system to be affected by the stress of that loss. But what's important, I think, here is most of these physical symptoms are our natural body's response to loss. And we don't have to fear our bodies. In fact, in a weird sort of way, the subtitle that I gave to the book is how the stress of loss can be an opportunity for healing. And I don't mean an opportunity anyone wants. Don't misunderstand me.
No, thanks.
But given that it is true, when we are experiencing grief, many people say it's like the volume dial got turned up on everything. My emotions are stronger. My physical sensations are stronger. My thoughts are racing around in my head. And the part that seems true is if we're able to find a way to be quiet and not too afraid, we can listen to the way our body is responding during stress, during grief. And we can try to ask, what would make me feel better? In a very genuine way. And I say that a good friend of mine, one of the things I really love is yoga. Yoga really helps me to connect my breathing with my movement, and it's very helpful to me. I have a really close friend, wonderful woman. Yoga just makes her mad. She just does not find it relaxing at all, right? She's just really annoyed by the pace and the whole 9 yards. The key here is really listening to yourself. What soothes your body? What makes your heart rate go down? What makes you feel comforted? And if we can develop that understanding of our response to our particular loss, we learn to be very authentic, right? Like you really learn things about yourself, and you then have that forever as you deal with other issues in your life. And so I think there is a way in which listening to the symptoms, even the body's symptoms that we have in grieving, can really teach us something.
And that's not necessarily easy
No.
at any time, much less during a time of crisis and deep
Yes.
grief, right?
Yes.
Because we have competing responsibilities and
Yeah.
narratives out
Yeah.
in the world about what we should be doing. And you
Yes.
talk about that a little bit.
Yes. I wasn't kidding when I said I sort of ricocheted through my life for much of my 20s and 30s. Always keeping busy and doing things. And I was a professor and I had many hats, and I came to discover that many of the physical symptoms that I was having, by keeping them out of my awareness, I wasn't actually able to respond to them in a way that helped me to have more energy or to pick the activities that were actually worth it to choose. It took me a long time to realize, oh, my body's actually trying to tell me something. And how to respond to that took me a long time to realize. And that's okay. You have the rest of your life to sort of figure out how to navigate this unique situation that you're in with your unique loss.
And so how might we work with a care team or a friend who, when we're in acute care, likening it to, taking the pregnancy test and
Yep.
you've got new information
Yeah.
and you schedule an appointment. Is
Yeah.
that helpful? Is it a grief specialist we need? What do we do acutely?
Yeah, I'd say in the short term, if we think about the idea that often, people have losses, the death of a loved one happens for many reasons. For some of us, it happens after a long period of caregiving, or even a short period of caregiving. But when we're caring for someone who is ill, we are often neglecting our own health for good reason, right? Our day is full of, I have to get a hold of the pharmacist and I have to talk to the doctor about this symptom and I have to, change this dressing or whatever it is. But asking ourselves, or even more likely, maybe asking our grieving friends, how long has it been since you've been for your regular checkup, where they test your blood and they ask, they do your blood pressure. How long has it been since you were to the dentist? Have you had your mammogram this year? Right? So
Yeah.
these are the normal medical tests that will pick up if something is wrong in the body. There's nothing magic about the way that the body might have medical illnesses when you're grieving. It's just we have to, in a moment where we may feel very overwhelmed and unmotivated,
Mhm.
still have to find ways to seek regular checkups, just to see how our body is doing.
Okay. That makes sense. And it's intuitive, right? And yet during this time,
Yeah,
it
it can
might feel like an
feel,
added responsibility. And
yes.
so speaking of intuitive, you had talked about getting in tune with
Yeah,
our body and what soothes us, and
yeah,
finding ways to let that support our grief.
yeah.
Much in the same way, we would wrap or elevate a sprain,
Yes,
right? Or
that's right.
tend to a physical wound or ailment we have.
Mhm.
But if it's hard to tune into our bodies, or if we're not already, keenly aware
Yeah,
of what's different or what's changed, or if we just, move it away, uh, what are some are there signs or symptoms
yeah,
or ways in which you might suggest what we look for, or
yeah.
how we get more in tune? You talk about intuitive eating, which I thought was
Yes.
smart. How do we
So,
use that
yeah,
intuition?
I think one of the most important things is to recognize that our physical systems are off, right? In the sense that most grieving people find difficulty with appetite and difficulty with sleeping, right? And so knowing a little bit about how those systems work can be helpful. So sleeping, for example,
Hmm.
most bereaved
Yeah.
people, research shows most bereaved people initially have insomnia.
Yeah.
And
What is up with that? It
it's
is,
so
right?
frustrating. You're like, I just need a break, I just
Right.
want some restoration. And that is incredibly frustrating. So thing number one to know is that research shows that we do over time, as our cortisol comes down and our adrenaline comes down and we start to develop new habits, for the vast majority of us, our sleep does improve over time. So that's always just a good, like, put a pin in the hope for that.
Okay.
But in addition, there's ways that we can work with our sleep system instead of against it. And so what happens is sometimes we start doing things that actually aren't helping our sleep. For example, a classic one is people start to fall asleep in front of the TV when they're on their couch in the living room, and then they have to get up and go to bed, and then they can't fall asleep, right? Because that initial, what we call sleep pressure, is gone. You've already fallen asleep. So, one thing about sleep, you can't force yourself to go to sleep, can't force yourself to stay asleep. But most of us can force ourselves to get up, can set an
Mm.
alarm and make ourselves get up, even if you didn't sleep well, even if you're still tired. And what happens is if we reset that circadian rhythm at the same time every single morning, 7 a.m., 6 a.m., 9 a.m., whatever it is, if we get up at the same time every day, that helps to reset the whole system. And we start to know what to expect. Our brain knows, oh, these are the sleeping hours. I can figure out how to make this work now. And it interestingly also resets our hormone systems. And so
Hmm.
that can actually help with mood as well. So getting up at the same time every day is one example of something we can do to work with our system to sort of help it get back into regulation.
Okay. And you talked too about cognitive behavioral therapy in a
Yeah.
study. What did you find with that study?
Yeah. So many of us find, a very good friend of mine who had an 18-month-old baby and her husband died very suddenly. She realized she just could not think about the future. She was absolutely she would just break down in tears. And she thought to herself, you know, I could probably think about the future for like a minute. And then maybe tomorrow I could think about it for 2 minutes. And she literally would just extend the amount of time she would let herself think about, what am I going to do, by a minute a day. And eventually that helped her not to have such terrified avoidance of even contemplating these ideas. So this was something she discovered on her own, but cognitive behavioral therapy, with the support of a, you know, of another therapist, can help us to figure out, what are we avoiding? What are we ruminating about? What are we not noticing in our body that might be important information for our grieving? And sometimes with that other person, it can help us to figure out what we need to do to respond, to comfort, to calm.
Oh, okay, that's helpful. And what would be your definition of CBT? How should we think of that?
So cognitive behavior therapy is ways that we think about how our thoughts and our behavior ultimately are connected to our mood. And so by intervening in the way we think about things, asking ourselves, okay, so I just had a thought. Is that really true? What's the evidence for that? What's the evidence against that, right? So I'll just stick to the same example. My friend who said, I cannot think about the future, she actually came up with a new way. She said, well, okay, I can't just keep thinking about the future, but I could think about it for a minute, right? By doing that, she became less afraid over time. So the way we think can really affect the way we feel. And a cognitive behavior therapist will use either thoughts or behaviors. Well, let's try something out. Let's try having you go to pump gas yourself if you haven't done that, or whatever it is, right? So by using thoughts and behaviors, we ultimately are affecting those really strong emotions and helping us to figure out how to live with them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for explaining it that way. And you mentioned mood. I feel like you're talking to me directly. It's fine. I'm just really landing. When you talk about mood, is that related to energy in any way? Because again, much like it's this kind of hamster wheel of a problem here. We're not getting sleep.
Yeah.
We have sleep anxiety, so we're not
Mhm.
sleeping, and
Yeah.
then we're not sleeping, so the brain fog is exacerbated. All of these, chicken or egg situation. But in terms of energy and that
Yeah.
kind of feeling down and depressed, what did your research find about those symptoms and how we might tune in and what we can do?
Yeah. I think, as a person with MS, energy is something I struggle with a lot. It's probably the symptom I've had most to learn how to navigate. And primarily, it's not going away. And I think there's an analogy there. People think that they will stop feeling grief at some point. And that is not likely to happen because it is just our natural response when we're aware of our loss. However, waves of grief can become more familiar, and we can come to learn how to work with them instead of against them, right? So what I mean by that is, for many people, there is an energy that can come with grief. Sometimes we call protest, right? This can't be true. And there's another response, which we call despair, which is, oh, no, they're really gone. And that has you can just feel how different that feels in the body, doesn't it? That sense of withdrawal and almost resignation. Now, what's interesting is it actually seems necessary to have these kinds of emotions because that's not the end of the story. We have to understand, no, they really are gone, as painful as that is, so that we start to also restore a life for ourselves, given that they are gone, right? And so I think of it around energy and motivation. Those are actually two different things that I talk about quite a bit in the book that I realized were two different things. So motivation is, I don't want to. I don't see the point. I don't, something says I should, but I have no interest in doing X, Y, and Z. Energy, on the other hand, is I literally don't have the battery for it. I just, even if I wanted to, or even when I do want to, I don't have any store left to give me the energy to do that. Those are two slightly different problems. And so figuring out kind of which one it is, or if it's both or whatever, can be helpful in terms of sort of if you're addressing energy, there's lots of ways to think about the physical aspect of energy. It may be that getting more movement, a little more exercise in your life can help you start to build stamina for things that you might want to do. And I mean, starting really slowly, like a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, right? And building that energy up slowly. On the other hand, motivation is often more about questions of meaning. Why am I doing this? What is the point, given that despair is true? And that can often be something that has more to do with coming to understand what this loss means for your life, and sometimes has to do with understanding how other people have been through this before. What have they come to understand about why life is, how life goes on, how life can incorporate loss? And sometimes finding meaning is about, what do I want to do because my loved one not died, not despite the fact that my loved one died. And many of us are drawn to volunteer work or memorials or something that helps to honor that person, that can give us a little more energy and motivation. And that can start to be a slow upward spiral.
And so when we're experiencing despair,
Yeah.
in these waves, I would imagine that's the time when having supports around us,
Yeah.
having a doctor who's in tune, who we've seen already, has a good baseline on us. Is despair then associated to that motivation? Do we see a
Mhm.
dip in motivation when despair goes up?
I think we often do. I don't always know that, it depends on the relationship you have with your doctor, obviously. The medical doctor isn't always the person I would think of first in dealing with sort of issues around what makes life meaningful, right? That is often, I think more often, your sort of pastor slash yoga instructor slash favorite author slash grandmother slash best friend, And the reason I say that in part is, in those moments of despair, which are natural and they're okay. You don't have to be afraid of despair, but despair leaves out hope. And so when I'm trying to support someone who's grieving, who's having a wave of despair, it's not my job to fix that. It's not my job to take that away. It's my job to witness that that is where they are right now, and to support that that is where they are right now. They are right. This person is gone and they are not coming back. But despair leaves out hope. So despair says in the moment, I'm going to feel like this forever. And so what I can contribute as someone who's there with them is saying, hey, listen, I don't know what your life is going to look like. I couldn't know what your life is going to look like. It's your life. But I can tell you that you will not feel like you feel right now forever. And I will be here with you until we figure out what your life is going to look like, however long that takes. And that sort of, I think of it as lending them my hope. Not trying to change how they feel, but sort of like, borrow my glasses. They're not your glasses. They're not a prescription that's going to work for you, but they might just help you bring something into focus for a moment. And I'm going to be here with you until we get there.
And so then there's community,
Yeah.
right? And so then in despair, so we need hope
Yeah.
and we need despair, because
Yeah.
despair brings us, it queries us to hope, it
Yeah.
sounds.
Yeah.
And so you talk at one point, Mary Frances, about, I just loved it, that community is the medicine.
Yes.
Can you speak to that? Especially here we are in an epidemic of loneliness,
Yeah.
and more disconnected than
Yeah.
ever, even though we're technologically more connected than ever.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
talk to us about community as a tool.
I think, I have right now a graduate student who is Native American, and we've been doing a lot of looking at Native American traditional healing practices, and specifically within the domain of grief. And some of the storytelling that we have read includes this phrase: "The people are the medicine." And they mean it quite literally. Now, as a neuroscientist, I layer on sort of my understanding, which is not indigenous, but I think about the idea that when we hug someone, their blood pressure goes down, their oxytocin increases. That hug literally is the pharmaceutical that is being developed inside that person. They literally are the medicine. And so, sort of take 2 hugs and call me in the morning, you know, feels, I'm making a jest, but the idea that it is when we are with loved ones, when we are with community, when we feel connected to our ancestors, to our extended family, to our chosen family, whoever it is, that has an impact on our physiological systems as well. It's not the same as the loss that we feel of this one individual, but it still also affects our physiology.
Oh, okay. And again, it is, it feels like something that I should have known, but now I know it. I know it much more concretely, and I know we're coming to time here, so I want to make sure, with just one more question. Reimagine does such a beautiful job of bringing us together
Yes.
in growth
Yeah.
through grief, and doesn't claim to be easy. We certainly
No.
know it isn't. Um, but if we can think a little bit about how we might reimagine a world where we're tuning into our body the
Yeah.
way we do other intuitive calls,
Yeah.
and where our world is recognizing grief care just like it is prenatal care.
Yeah.
What are some things that we can do, we can take agency of and do
Yeah.
to drive toward that world?
Yeah. As a grieving person, there's a wonderful book by Colin Campbell, who I know he's just been on Reimagine, or he's coming on Reimagine. I can't remember. Colin wrote a book called Finding the Words. And Colin's 2 children as teenagers, Ruby and Hart, were killed in a car accident. And he has lived with that grief. Colin's book is really in part about telling people what you need. And I don't mean that in a self-centered kind of way, but as an example, Colin really beautifully writes about he needed people to say Ruby and Hart's name. And he found a way with friends who were unwilling to sort of bring it up. And, he found a way to find the words to ask them to use their name. And it's such a beautiful example of tuning into what you need, what brings you comfort, what slows your heart rate down, what makes you feel calm, and then find a person that you can ask for that thing. I think our capacity to do that, though difficult and undoubtedly stuttering, finding a way to do that teaches our whole community what grief is like for this person, and could be an entryway for someone else's grief who has it years later.
Oh, it feels like permission when you say it
Yes.
that way,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
what good practice
Yes.
for us all. What a beautiful call to action,
Yeah.
really to just to tune into our grief and speak it
Yeah.
and ask for what we need.
Yes.
Thank you, Mary Frances. This was so much. I encourage everybody, if you've not already, pick up this book for yourself. I have 2 copies, one as a gift. It makes a terrific gift. And thank you for your time, your perspective, your important work that you're putting out into the world that's helping us all better understand our grieving brains, our grieving body, our love, our attachment, our grief, and ultimately ourselves and one another.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So thank you for all of that. And it's been an honor to be in conversation here with you.
Thank you,
And
Steph. This is
thank you.
wonderful.
Thank you. And in speaking of honor, Andy, I think you're going to introduce our honor
I've
ceremony.
actually asked Brad to chime in and take over.
Great.
All right, I'll take over. Hi,
Hi,
everyone.
Brad.
Hi, it's so good to see you. My name is Brad. I'm the executive director at Reimagine. I just want to share on behalf of Reimagine how grateful we are to both Mary Frances and to Steph, and to Jessica, who I'll introduce you to in a minute. But it's been a privilege to bear witness to this conversation. And I do have a question, really for the two of you. You know, in this conversation, there was a seeking to understand more about grief and about heartbreak. And Mary Frances, you know, your work is there's a science to it, trying to study these things. You know, why? What is the understanding at the ultimate level of thinking about these things? What is rooted at the base of your desires, both of you in your different ways, to learn more about grief? Steph.
Oh, I see. For me, Brad, that's such a great question. And what calls to mind is initially for me, as I was trying to understand my experience, I was feeling like I'm pretty sure this is grief, but it doesn't feel like I thought it would feel. And people aren't interacting with me as I thought they would. So I must be missing something. And I asked my therapist for some insight. And she said, you can't intellectualize grief. You have to feel it. And I said, fine, Amy, but it would help my brain if I understood what was happening and why it was happening. And she said, well, it just is. And of course, there's some science to it, but for me, understanding through Mary Frances's work, understanding why and why this is a shared human experience, not only helps me understand it better, it helps me feel less alone.
Yeah.
And that was really important for me, especially during a time when I felt incredibly isolated. And when people feel, as you know, when people feel shame or embarrassment associated with their grief, they're more apt to isolate and grieve alone. And it doesn't have to be that way.
That's wonderful, Steph. I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm just going to read 2 sentences from toward the end of my book, because I tackle exactly the question you asked, Brad. That's so funny. Mine is not a motivation to study this phenomenon that comes from fear. It comes from the fascination and wonder and awe that 2 separate bodies can come together through attachment in this way, tethered through invisible bonds, creating our deepest motivations and strongest emotions, transcending time and space. To me, it is the way we understand love is revealed sometimes when we have grief.
That's beautiful, and I love what you both said, and Steph, it really spoke to me. You know, I think it's apropos of Mary Frances's work as well. Just thinking about how we move through the world and knowledge itself. There's something about knowing how the sun orbits, or how we orbit the sun, rather. Excuse me. How uh, making sense of something that otherwise can feel so big, and how that shared knowledge that we start developing, I guess, can give us more comfort. And so there is something about that, and the shared connection that we can gain by diving deeper into the things that maybe are most confusing
Yeah.
or most overwhelming. So I really appreciate this, and it makes me want to honestly dive deeper into both of your outputs, your incredible outputs. And thank you so much, both of you, for sharing this with us and inspiring all of us to get closer to the hard parts of life.
Thank you.
And we'll come back and wrap up with the two of you in a few minutes, but I wanted to introduce to you now, as we move into the honor ceremony, Reverend Jessica Sharp, a spiritual practitioner, entrepreneur, and artist. She's been involved with Reimagine since 2018. She is the founder of the Joyful Death Institute, where she guides individuals and communities in embracing death as a joyful, healing, and actually liberating experience. Ordained by the Church of Natural Grace in San Francisco, she is apprenticed under Korean and other indigenous-based shamans. Her professional background is in crisis management, systems design, and social impact, and it's my delight and privilege to introduce to you Reverend Jessica Sharp, who's going to lead us into an opportunity to honor what we're here to do.
Hello, hi. Thank you so much for introducing me, Brad, and thank you so much to the beautiful speakers before me. I'm so moved. There were so many beautiful nuggets in there that I'm going to be thinking about for months. So thank you so much, Steph and Mary Francis. I want to share a little bit about my story and how I ended up where I'm at, working with death. I think that everyone I've met who's been involved in death and grief has told me that it has been more of a calling and an arriving than almost a conscious decision. So a little bit about me. I actually started a entertainment company and was about to launch it, and then the pandemic 2020 March happened and everything shut down. And I found myself just completely at a loss for understanding what to do with my life, what to do with my energy, as it was becoming clear that we weren't going to be having social gatherings anymore. So what was I supposed to do with a party company? So I ended up arriving at Psychic Horizons Church of Natural Grace, taking their meditation classes, because I needed something, and meditation seemed like a tool that would be helpful for me. So while I was there, I learned how to be centered and grounded and present in my body. And then I, of course, learned how to use my clairvoyant and mediumship abilities while I was there at the school. And I just got so much benefit out of it. I just kept going until I ended up becoming a minister. And I did an apprenticeship with them. And during my apprenticeship, I ended up specializing in something called the transition reading. And the transition reading is a reading with somebody who has left their body within 3 to 5 days. And I want to share a little bit about what I've experienced from these transitioned readings and what I've learned. As Brad mentioned, I also rely on my heritage of Buddhism and indigenous practices of Korea. And I have done pilgrimage back to the home of the Buddha. And there I have dove deeper into Himalayan Buddhism. And I do also work with the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And I'm a follower of Padmasambhava, or Guru Rinpoche, who created the system of understanding, which is working with and through the bardos, understanding that we're consciousness moving through different states of consciousness. So as I've been able to just have this really profound experience of working with folks in spirit shortly after they've left their bodies and with their families, what this looks like is I get to share a little bit of a life review. I get to talk to them and ask them questions and provide an overview of their life, and also reconciliation that wasn't able to take place while they were still in their body. And so some of the gems that I wanted to share with you today was about this. My first topic of gems I wanted to share was actually something that I've dealt with a lot in my own life as well as with my peers, and that is death by suicide. This is a really difficult topic, but I think such an important one because I've lost more of my friends, peers to suicide than any other form of death. And what I've learned after communicating with folks who experience death by suicide is that in the system of the Bardos, where we go through the phases, they actually get moved into a holding place before they move to the Bardos, so that they have a time and space to heal from the pains in their life that cause them to make that decision. And as I've spoken to some of my friends who were in that space, they shared with me things like, I feel like me again. I feel free. I finally feel happy. And I offer this to you because I know that it's such a difficult topic. And I think that this is a question that a lot of people ask of like, well, how are they now? Are they okay? And the answer is yes, they are. And not only they're okay, but a special level of care and love is provided for them before they move into the Bardo states and through the reincarnation. And some of the things that they shared with me is they've asked me, please continue to think of me and to play my favorite music. When you play my favorite music, you'll know that I'm there with you. I did have a friend who recently passed, and he really wanted to make sure his family knew that he was finally happy again and that he was finally able to feel the love that he felt like he couldn't connect with when he was alive. And so I share this because it's profound for me to hear and understand from these spirits that this is their experience. In a recent reading, I was working with a client and his father had recently transitioned. And during the life review, what we saw was that his father felt a lot of permission at a spirit level to express his love for his son when his son was accomplishing things, according to societal standards, when he was graduating or becoming a lawyer. And the father shared with me that he wants his son to know that that's not the only time he loved him. That's not that he had this limitation of only feeling permission to express his love to his son during this time, but his love for his son is so much vaster and so much grander and so much more than what he had expressed when he was alive. And these folks were not particularly religious or spiritual, but the father kept on repeating to me over and over, please make sure he knows that he can still speak to me. Please make sure that just as if when I was alive, he could come and speak to me, tell him he can still speak to me now. And that was very important for his father to be able to know that his son could still communicate with him and that he loved him outside of his accomplishments. He loved him unconditionally. And this was really powerful for me to be able to share because I know that my friend also then shifted his relationship with his own sons and was able to see a reflection of the ways and times that he felt permission to share and express love to his sons and to feel a deeper sense of permission to open that up and to be able to feel and express love outside of just the sort of societal appropriate or standard ways and times of which we express love. So with that, I want to open up the floor to have you invite those who you love in, the spirits that you love in, and write their names of your beloveds into the chat and anything else that you would like to share about them as we remember them, as they request and they ask us to remember them and to celebrate the beautiful life that they had and the love that they share with you that is not limited, that is not conditional, that is still very much present.
All right, thank you so much, everybody. This concludes the honor ceremony. And though the formal ceremony is over, if you have names you'd like to add to the chat here, beautiful names, beautiful memories, don't let the fact that the formal part is concluded get in the way of adding those. And if you didn't add names and you just thought them in your heart, we honor all of those names as well. Thank you so much to you, Jessica, for that beautiful introduction and calling in our ancestors and those who've come before us, as well again as Mary Frances and Steph. Now would be a really wonderful time, in addition to adding these names, to also maybe share some gratitude to our wonderful speakers for this evening, and gratitude for yourself as well, for showing up in this space, for facing something that we don't normally talk about in community, and being willing to let all of us bear witness to one another, our presence, and perhaps the names that we've shared, and what they mean to each of us. This is a really beautiful moment that we're all experiencing together right now, and a very sacred one, and we don't take that lightly here, although we do have lightness in our hearts as well as heaviness. So thanks again for that. I'm going to now pull up a slide, and we are going to consider the opportunity to extinguish these candles together. And for that piece of our conclusion here, I'm going to call back Jessica, Stephanie, and Mary Frances, and really all of us. We're going to read this extinguishing blessing 3 times. And at the end of the 3rd time, first of all, as we read, you're welcome to read aloud with us wherever you are. But at the end of the 3rd time, we'll count down, and collectively we can take a deep breath together and then extinguish our candles. And now if you want your candle to stay lit and it feels like something you don't want to let go of in this moment, that's totally your prerogative. Everything here is an invitation. So with that, I invite Jessica to kick us off in this concluding prayer.
Thanks, Brad. By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive hope and the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive hope and the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
And Mary Frances, are you able to bless us with the 3rd reading?
Thank you. By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive hope and the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
All right, we can hold our candles up. 3, 2, 1. And Reverend Jessica, I wonder if you might just lead us in 3 more deep breaths together as a community. It felt really nice to exhale just now after such an emotional ceremony. I wonder if you could just guide us in a couple of deep breaths.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Also, maybe before, if it feels good to give a little wiggle to just release whatever is physically in the body. And let's take 3 nice deep breaths. So nice breath in and out. And let a nice out if it helps. Nice deep breath in and out. Make the last one count. Nice breath in and out.
All right, that feels great. Thank you so much, Jessica, for that. I want to bring back a slide, and I want to let everyone know about something very special as we transition to think about what could be next for us. This is the first time we've made this announcement at an event like this, and it's something new we have in store. We've heard from folks that these are beautiful ways in, that Reimagine, you know, these spaces that are being created. We're trying to make sure that everyone has a space to turn. That we believe that it should be a right to have community support, accessible and engaging community support in the face of life's storms. And we don't really have that, but we've created these spaces thanks to all of your generosity and the people that have blessed us with their presence and their leadership to hold spaces like this. But people are saying, now what? We come together, and how might we actually process some of this? And Mary Frances talked about some of the things we might do. People turn to acts of service, ways of memorializing, things that we might do in our lives. And we are holding an opportunity and inviting you in to what is called the Reimagine Why Wait group pathway. And this would be for people that are in this specific event today. If we would build a cohort for those of you interested in joining to continue with 10 sessions together where we might explore the things that we shouldn't wait to do in our life. Loss and grief teach us how precious life can be. And it can orient us to new possibilities if we give it the space and the chance to be with our experiences. And so you could join a group with like-minded peers from today, and through self-reflective activities and group discussions, we'll be turning our aspirations into tangible steps. Anyone who signs up for this group would be invited to take on, it could be a tiny project or a big project, but something designed around a meaningful goal that emerges through talking about how we might want to transmute and externalize the things that are in our hearts in lived ways, constructive, healthy ways. And you'll have community support and guided facilitation from my dear colleague, Derek Hosberg, a nurturing space with your peers. And these will take place on Zoom. And you'll actually also be some of the first people to have access to this new platform where some of this takes place. We've spent the last 3 years at Reimagine trying to rewire social media from the ground up to create something actually healthy, where we can be our authentic self and reflect and grow and go on growth journeys together. And so we'll be using this platform as a tool, and over 10 sessions, we'll see what comes up. And we've already been doing this with folks at Stanford Medicine, and just kicking it off with the National End of Life Doulas Alliance that are doing this with us as well. And we're inviting the folks who are here today to join us on this journey. So it's really based in some ways on Mary Oliver's quote, what is it you plan to do with this one wild and precious life? And together we'll figure that out using the sparks of what brought you here today, the names, the pain that might be in your heart, and see where it might lead us. You can see some of the session details here, but we can share more information. I think my colleague in the chat will paste some information on how to register. I want to share the time of these sessions. They're going to be on Wednesdays, beginning April 9th through June 11th, from 10:30 till 12 p.m. or 1:30 p.m. to 3 Eastern time, 10 sessions, 90 minutes each. And there's tiered pricing. Reimagine is a nonprofit supported by your contributions. That's what makes it all go round. So there's various levels of support that are possible, but we don't want to really turn anyone away who wants to participate. So there's even a community access option on the low end that's a need-based option. So please, if you have more questions about this or interested, you can email my colleague Deb at letsreimagine.org. And we would be just so excited to do this with you, to see what projects emerge from this group, and for you to connect to the other participants who are here this evening together in community on an ongoing journey. All right, thanks for listening to that. And we hope to see some of you signing up on the link that my colleague's dropping on the chat. And now I want to bring back Andy, who kicked us off so beautifully this evening, to share about some other upcoming Reimagine events that you can look forward to.
Thanks, Brad. Our theme in the month of March is focused on child loss and bereaved parents. This three-part series will touch on grief experiences across the life cycle. It's certainly intended for those who have direct experience with child loss, but it's equally designed for those who want to learn how to show up for a bereaved parent. Um, it's interesting. Grieving spouses are widows. Grieving children are orphans. But what's the word in English for a father, mother, or guardian who outlives their child? There really isn't a universal term in English. And perhaps that's an indication of how catastrophic this loss truly is. The series, The Wisdom of Grieving Parents, explores child loss from infancy to adolescence to adulthood. All of our speakers are grieving parents. We'll touch on a number of themes. The experience of grief when the relationship with children is complicated or estranged. We'll talk about how family dynamics shift after the loss of a child, the differences between anticipated and sudden loss, as well as stigmatized losses that Jessica brought up tonight, death by suicide, overdose, other circumstances associated with taboos. We've got great guest speakers. Mary Frances mentioned Colin Campbell. We have Michelle Hord, Dion Monsanto, Myra Sack, Joyal Mulheron, and Dr. Joanne Cacciatore, who blurbed Mary Frances's book, by the way. They're storytellers, they're authors, they're artists, they're scholars, they're grief educators, they're grief activists. So I hope you can sign up for that. I want to add that, I said there isn't a universal term for parents who outlive their children, but we have a term that a Reimagine collaborator has come up with. His name is Henry Cameron Allen, and he's a bereaved parent. And last Sunday, he hosted a virtual retreat for a group he calls peregrines because they wander in a foreign landscape. For your interest, Nicole's going to paste a link in the chat about Henry's group, which is called the Lost Travelers Club. We have other collaborator events happening this month. We have Room for Grief. Room for Grief is taking place every third Thursday of the month, and it's a drop-in space for anyone experiencing any form of grief through death, loss, or otherwise. And last month, Michelle Thornhill hosted our Room for Grief, and she's doing it again. So I hope you sign up for that. I did want to mention a number of collaborator events that are taking place. On March 6th, Reverend Jessica and the Joyful Death Institute are hosting the Death Doulas of Color monthly meetup for networking and skills sharing. Also on March 12th, the Joyful Death Institute hosts Grief Rituals for Climate Change. It's a monthly gathering to dive into somatic practices, meditations, earth-based rituals, and art practices. March 20th, we have Death Over Drafts. This one is over Zoom. Stephanie Elkins is in the house. Hi, Stephanie. It's a space where end-of-life conversations are tapped at breweries nationwide and virtually. Hosts Lisa Paul and Stephanie Elkins will be in conversation with Ian McCarter, who is an artist, grief counselor, and former hospice nurse. And finally, this month we have dancer, choreographer Jamie Morrison. Some of you may have witnessed her at a previous vigil. She returns with her monthly series, Mapping Grief in the Body, apropos of bodies tonight. On March 30th, she will focus on movement generated from the heart. And Jamie will actually told me she will reference Mary Frances's chapter on the heart from her new book. So that is that. I think that's it. Oh, yes. And then we have our next vigil. And that is featuring Suzanne O'Brien, who is a nurse, and she's the founder of the Doula Givers Institute. Please sign up for that as well. And that's it for upcoming events.
Thanks so much, Andy. As you can all see, we have a lot of events at Reimagine, and the reason it is because it's powered by you in the community. We've built a platform that allows people to host events for the public or for your own community, because no one person is an expert in all of these topics. People know what your communities need. And so we try to have a place where people can offer these experiences. If you yourself are ever interested in creating an experience for the public or for your own community, we're here to support you in creating an event like the events that Andy has named this evening. And please reach out to us if that's something you're interested in doing. We have an incredible community of collaborators that really power all of our work. And so with that, I wanted to conclude with some special thanks. As I'm wont to do, I drafted a poem as I was listening to Mary Frances and Steph and Reverend Jessica. These are in the style of what I call 15s. They're 5 lines, 3 syllables each. They're very, very simple. No matter what, they work out, so that's nice. And so let me just share some gratitude again for Mary Frances, to Steph, to Reverend Jessica. This first poem is called Every Body. Too much thought, need more feel. You bring us back within to break, be, heal. So thank you for bringing us back to our bodies, back to ourselves, where we are allowed and given permission to be broken, but to also just to be with that, and ultimately to find the love that it takes within ourselves and the knowledge to heal. And I also want to thank Reimagine staff. So many of people made this event possible this evening. Andy, first and foremost, thank you so much to you. Also to Amanda, who's here, Dara, Nicole. Is anyone else is Deb here? We have a wonderful group of people at Reimagine that are committed to this work. And I would be remiss to also say that we're powered by donations. So if you, and really what happens is we want this to be accessible for everyone. So some people are able to step up and contribute something, and that makes it accessible for other people. That's how this whole model works, to create free and accessible spaces. So if you're somebody, Nicole, thank you so much for dropping in the chat. We have a survey. We would love your feedback on this experience this evening. That helps us make this better for you to learn what you want. And also within the survey, there's a link that if you're interested in participating in these different ways, but also there's a support link if you want to support Reimagine. If you've already done so, thank you so much. So many of you have contributed, and we deeply appreciate it. And so therefore, thanks to the staff, and really thanks to all of you for showing up this evening. This is the thank you poem, because we do this every month. So thank you every month. Sad but glad to mourn, grieve, grow, and love together. I guess with that, I know we're a couple minutes over, but maybe just hear one last reflection, maybe one sentence each from Mary Frances and Steph, just because you've been so special this evening and really anchoring this conversation. Is there just one reflection you have on your experience here this evening, or something to send us off into our lives? Steph, I'll start with you.
It's in the book. We spoke about it briefly. The people are the medicine.
And why don't we, Jess? Sorry, I'll just call you in too. Why not hear from everyone? I don't want to exclude you.
You want me to go next?
Yeah, go ahead. We'll
Okay.
let Mary Frances conclude.
Community is the answer, and we're doing it here now. And I just, gratitude for that. We are being the medicine right now. And so thank you.
And Mary Frances.
In my first book, The Grieving Brain, I tell a wonderful story about a troop of primates, not human. And when a mother has lost her infant in this troop, anyone in the troop is allowed to groom her, because it is such an important time, and she sometimes can't do it for herself. And I just feel us all together in that way.
Well, may we all groom each other for the rest of our days. We'll end this like we do vigils, hence past and forth, where there's one word that sounds good on Zoom. We've tried to sing happy birthday to each other. That sounds like total badness. But if we just say the word love, it somehow sounds not horrible, maybe even good. So on the count of 3, we can unmute each other, or ourselves rather, and we can just say the word love on repeat. And let's just hear a cacophony of love as we head off into our spaces and leave each other with that one word, which is really the essence of what it all means. So 3, 2, 1. Let's hear some love.
Love.
Love,
Love.
Love.
All you need is love.
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 Love is all you need.
Love you, Tom.
Love.
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 Love. Love. Love.
Love.
Love. Love.
Love.
Oh,
Love.
love.
Love. Love.
Yes.
Love.
Love.
You love company, my dog.